Good afternoon, gents and ladies. Welcome to the Philosophy Society. My name is Muhammad Khojali, and with me is
Muhammad Abdurrahman Zain, who is kind of a guest of this philosophy society. But now we're part of this unnamed podcast. Well, unnamed yet. You probably know the name by now, which means you have more information than we do at the moment.
I think it's fair to say that you're no longer a guest. You're more invested in. You're perhaps more invested in this than I am at this moment. But yeah, like I said, welcome everybody, and this is like Abdulrahman says, it's a pilot, and we're going to be talking about the motive behind starting the Philosophy Society and the reasoning behind it and why it's necessary, specifically during this time and here in Sudan.
Yeah, we thought that would be like a good start for the pilot episode because most people would know us from the Philosophy Society. So, Doc, what are your motivations for starting the Philosophy Society, or where did the idea come from?
I think there's a myriad of reasons as to why to start a Philosophy Society here in Sudan in our society, but I think chief among them are, well, first of all, it's every single sort of academic lecture or venture or any academic sort of enterprise or activity here in Sudan is contaminated, is infiltrated, and even perhaps, impregnated with political ideology.
Political and religious ideology. Right?
Political and religious ideology, yes.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned about the whole co-piloting of subjects, when it comes to philosophy.
Well, yeah, so this happens a lot, even when you're not studying philosophy. It's just that even when you study economics, for example, you get this book that talks about how Islamic economic theory is superior to all economic theories, and it comes from an angle of quote-unquote philosophy, which I find kind of disgusting. It's very intellectually dishonest. It's the sort of thing that you do when you already have an idea that you want to prove, and you use the idea to prove itself. What was the name of the fallacy?
Of the fallacy?
Yeah, of the fallacy of when you try to prove something by assuming the thing is true.
That I'm not familiar with.
Well, anyway, It's that sort of thing, and I find that dishonest. It's not necessarily that I find it wrong. I find it that if it is true, you have to discuss it in a logical manner. To me, especially for economics or some of those, essential sciences that we have in society.
Absolutely. I think just not just to talk about what's it called, religion as well. I mean, I think necessarily when it comes to religion, it becomes a little bit dogmatic in the sense that you're following. I was just gonna get a little bit political, but it's bound to. But just to be fair, I think, and I've given this example previously, where I've went to a lecture to do with Sufism in the middle class here in Sudan, and I think like a sandwich stuffed inside the lecture, there was talk of the glorious reincarnation of Marxism in Sudanese society, in Sudanese politics, and so I think it would be prejudiced to say.
I'm sorry. What does that have to do with Sufism?
Yes, that is the problem. Yeah. So imagine sitting in a lecture for an hour, 2 hours, I believe, and then halfway through the lecture, and you're hearing all these Sufism, and like halfway through the lecture, you hear because of this. What's it called? Marxism is going to come back to, and I don't know.
Some sort of like a scary demon of Marxism.
No, it was glorified in a sense. It's like, yay, Marxism is coming back to,
okay.
which reincarnation would be a wrong, because she said return. So I think it would be a wrong. I don't know. Was Marxism ever established? I don't think it was.
It wasn't established in Sudan. Well, I'm not sure. I'm not very well versed in Sudanese history, not that much, because I'm a very recent child of Sudan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But as I was saying, so it's political and religious ideologies that sort of impregnate any sort of intellectual discourse here in Sudan that I find it I thought it'd be prudent or necessary for us to establish a philosophy society where people can come and engage in philosophical discourse and not necessarily either conform to or against. Yeah, you can have the same. It's just people with an open mind. And I think once I was asked, would you mind if this kind of disposition comes, whether it's members of the Secret Service infiltrating these chambers or people from this kind of part? And to the answer to this, I would love to have members of the Secret Service come to anything. Maybe they'll learn something, or members of the communist or the Islamist
because
parties.
even if they don't really agree with you, you may present them with an argument that they will not really concede to at the moment, but they will think about for a long while.
Absolutely. And if their position is more accurate, it will be the same thing vice versa.
Exactly. That's why philosophy exists. It's just a conversation throughout centuries. Yeah.
And so it's almost like a literally a hall where people sit down and talk about things that might be taboo in regular places. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that we've discussed previously that were a little bit perhaps controversial.
Yeah, we've should I mention them because they might be kind of problematic. Yeah, well, we talked about godhood, the nature of what God is, and what is in the minds of the people, and what God really is. And how that entity affects our lives. We talked about sexuality, homosexuality to be more specific. What else did we talk about?
We talked about love.
Yeah, we talked about love. We talked a lot about that. Everybody had a story for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And similar topics. But I think another reason why I started the Philosophy Society is, well, the major reason I would say is that for me personally, philosophy has been sort of, and I like to give this example, but sort of like my mistress, she's yes, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
So who's the missus?
Oh, the Mrs. Well, I'm not going to divulge the nature of my, just for purposes. And mother, if you're listening, this is I'm being held hostage. But it's sort of like my mistress. It's been with me for so. Unlike your mistress, obviously, she wants to wreck your home, and so my home I consider my sort of my mind palace or my mind, in which indulging in sort of existential thoughts, existential isolation. I remember once I had to see two psychologists for that, but it was all worth it because
Yeah.
well,
The more you break it, the more robust that it comes back, isn't it? Yeah, it comes with the base placed in a more stable ground. Let's say that more robust.
Yeah,
That's the point, I think.
absolutely.
It hurts, but you're stronger for it.
It hurts so good. But
Stop bringing your kinks into this podcast all the time.
Yeah, and so it's literally been a very colorful history, in philosophy. I mean, I think especially just one of the earliest memories that I've had where I sort of introspectively reflected onto like philosophical sort of thought was, I think I was at the age of perhaps maybe 12, and and I think we went to this park and there was like bouncy castles, and so we were in these bouncy castles, and two of the kids came and kicked me and my brother out, and so I went up to my dad and I'm like, "Yo, Dad, these kids kicked us out. We're going to have to go and sort them out." And my dad just looked at me, didn't like the substance of what I was saying, did not even compute. And he said to me, he said, "If that was the right thing to do, you wouldn't have come and told me." if you told me you're looking for validation, essentially for me to tell you that it's right or wrong. And from that, I thought deeply, I mean, perhaps even till today, thinking deeply about relativist morality, what's right and what's wrong.
I don't think I get it. What did your dad say?
He said that if there's something, if you are like I said, I'm going to go sort these kids out. And he said, if that was the right thing to do, you'd have done it already. You wouldn't have come and consulted me. You're just looking for validation.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of heavy to lay on a 12-year-old or above
Right.
bouncy castles.
Right.
But okay, I respect that. That's why it forms to be your mistress now.
Yeah.
What kind of childhood? Wow.
Yeah.
So what has been your experience about philosophy in Sudan?
My experience, I think here in Sudan, necessarily because philosophy is demonized in some sense. Yeah, I think that there's something that you said about it being the bit falsafa or whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of like when they tell you بتتفلسف, and it's like you're just talking and running your mouth for no particular reason. It's hollow and pointless. That's the connotation of saying that somebody is بيتفلسف. And not just philosophy, is just a manifestation of the underlying idea, which is that thought in itself is a luxury in Sudan.
Right. So that's like the experience here in Sudan. I mean, the people who have graced us in sort of this hall in the philosophy society, I think all of them categorically have, I mean, otherwise they wouldn't be here, but have like a very, very curious mind, and very interesting.
They have like a it's almost innate nature to want to know more and experience more and sort of discuss more, which we've seen,
and to which is I mean, I'm not without quote unquote throwing shade, which is a contrast. I mean, in just regular demotic language or colloquial speech, here in Sudan, you have people who have, I think what you said was a script, a sort of scripted.
You have more. It's more of a script and than actual conversation or options. Let's say you have A, B, or C, and each one means something about you. So you identify with what you say, because what you say forms the group that you, or like sort of each thing that you say and how you say it says something about you in the society, or it's believed to be so. Even the way you dress, even the way you walk, let's say. So everybody is hyper aware and hyper careful about how they go about doing, how they conduct themselves. Even the quote unquote rebellious communities, the like Shabab communities, they do have a script, even though they don't know it. They have a script, but it's constantly evolving, maybe from like month to month, week to week. The things like certain phrases change, but they do identify which kind of in-group you belong to.
Yeah, and I think an interesting word that you said there is rebellious, and I think essentially rebellious against whom or against who? Maybe tradition, maybe the hypernormativity, but also the form of rebellion in which they take necessarily isn't perhaps what might be considered as edging on the limits of Sudanese taboos.
Yeah. So it's sort of systematic rebellion, if it's kind of an oxymoron. But in Sudan you have this specific path that you go through, and you are marked some like kind of rebellious. There is the safe rebellion and there's the unsafe rebellion. The unsafe rebellion will get you incarcerated in like no time. The safe rebellion is the thing that most people do in order to feel that they have some sort of control over where they're going in life, or like they have that sense of individuality. It's unfair to say that it's not true, but it's hard to see as authentic if everybody is doing the same thing, down to the same words.
And perhaps this speaks, which is very interesting. I think it speaks to the societal structure, which is the collectivist societal structure in which there needs to be a sort of homogeneous idea. And interestingly, even the homogeneous idea, that at an extreme might be dogmatic, but even the rebelliousness is also
Dogmatic. Yeah,
dogmatic.
exactly. So they have the saying in what a Jama'ir is. So no matter what you do, if you have enough people with you, it's gonna be like, all right, which is kind of true, but it becomes more of more of like a rule than it is a guide. So that's why you have safe rebellion and unsafe rebellion, and that's why you have people who would do things the exact same way they see the group doing it, not because they want to. They find the thing that they most closely identify with, and they mold the peripheries of themselves to kind of the rest of them, the rest of their selves to fit into that in group.
Fair enough. I mean, back to the question that you asked me, which is, what have you noticed about philosophy here in Sudan, philosophical engagement? I think the most talked about subjects, almost as if conversational etiquette here in Sudan would be politics. I mean, if you go to Sidisha, you're talking about politics. If you take a rickshaw, you're talking about politics. If you take a tarhal or, you know, what have you, it's always about politics. And perhaps one could see politics as a branch of philosophy, but even the politics that we practice, not even the politics that we talk about, the political practices in itself here, I think, are a little bit perhaps rudimentary, and uncouth.
Rudimentary?
Yes.
You mean like, how exactly?
As in organized politics with a political idea. I mean, there's politics, and literally, I have yet to see policies being.
I see. Well, that's true because most people don't even know how the country is run. They don't know specific policies. There haven't been new policies since like ever.
Yeah.
So the political process, if there is one at this point even, or if there ever was one, is unclear because it has not been practiced. It's kind of rusty. Even functionally and in the minds of the public, I think.
Right. And so without going to digress, but the reason why I bring politics up, and which is a topic that's, it's not necessarily sensitive, but I think if we do engage into it or delve into it, it will consume perhaps all of our thing.
Yeah,
and
it would.
Yeah, and I think it's because of, I think it's inconsequential because of the fact that you said that no one understands it. I mean, we are literally fed information not through like an official channel, but rather from WhatsApp and Facebook and Twitter and all those, which, you know, can be easily fabricated.
But you know, the brighter side of that would be that each one of us learn the practice of sort of self-filtering or like fact-checking by themselves. It's a really important skill, no matter where you are, even if you have like official channels, things like that. I think this joke has been going around that the Sudanese population, especially the Twitter population, is kind of having trust issues now about everything that they hear, which is kind of good. That sort of mental hygiene is really, really important. Although I wish it didn't have to be in such a way that we're fed so much news from so many outlets that are unofficial. But yeah, there's a bright side to this at the end.
Silver lining. Yeah. But yeah, beyond that, even the conversation around politics seemed to revolve around I think would be the negative aspect of that is necessarily it does, and it goes back to the whole in-group, out-group culture. It necessarily, I mean, here in Sudan, the political, and I don't know how we got from politics to politics, sorry, but but here in Sudan, the politics here is very binary in the sense that you have a polarized left and a polarized right. One could argue extreme right and extreme left.
Extreme left?
We're talking about the the Communist Party.
Oh, okay.
We don't have a liberal, like we have a socialist party, but I don't think it's, well, I wouldn't want to assume, but I think more notoriously, as say, known is perhaps the Communist Party in Sudan, and the Islamist parties, which is I mean just thinking about it frustrates my thoughts.
Religion in politics is just it's such a weird mix. The thing is, it works so well because you've already have that kind of shortcut in the minds of people, so you just kind of exploit it. That's why I always say that religion is kind of a short circuit for critical thinking. So maybe this is because I come from like a networking background, but imagine that you have like a small backdoor into the mind of each person, and that backdoor is religion. So it bypasses all of their mental checks. Whatever you say through that backdoor is like total truth instantly, whatever it is. They might even vote for you without saying anything. You don't even present a policy, you don't present anything, but the mere fact that you identify with this religion or like support it so vehemently would be like enough of a security for them to let you do whatever. It goes back to the in-group out-group thing. Yeah,
I think just to juxtapose that position, here in Sudan, it has, it has been used as a tool to garner or gain or muster, support and vote for not even policies, and it's not even voting, but just to carry on the status quo for so long, yani.
a cult of personalities.
It
Everywhere.
really, it absolutely is. It absolutely is a sort of occultist. I mean, something that I do not understand is how certain political parties have mass following based on persons, like historical persons. This is something, I swear, it's something occult like, is the thing. But also on another level, I think that it's almost impossible to disengage religion, or specifically Islam, or maybe even religion, because we do have a Christian sort of civilization back, back when. Even Jewish.
Yeah.
And other religions. But I think it would be sort of a very difficult task to disengage religion from the ethos of the country in itself. And while, yes, in the last 30 years, we have seen the detriments of what religion can do when it comes to politics, also there are, I think if utilized appropriately, there are titanic, advantages that can be gained. But of course, even saying those things sort of sounds like, because we're so in the trauma of the 30 years that has passed, that even saying those things, that there's titanic advantages that could be gained from religion in politics, even that sounds like a subliminal message.
But like I said, it's just a short circuit, because all of the titanic advantages, I assume, depend on the fact that it bypasses the critical mind, I suppose, right?
I think when we talk about critical here, I'm going to be a little bit controversial. Not like that we haven't been for the past 10 minutes or so, but I'm going to be a little bit controversial in the sense that I think that this, not a class necessarily, but a demographic of people, or let's say a class of people who would like to engage. I mean, when we talk about academics and engagements and introspective reflection and critique and all that stuff, there are people who are willing to engage and people who want to engage, and that class of people should be untouched and should everything at their disposal to do whatsoever they please. But there's also a class of persons, and I would argue a majority, where, especially here in Sudan, where the collectivist nature of our societal structure allows us to sustain our living without necessarily having, which could be problematic, but necessarily I don't see it changing unless our population increases. I mean, we're a very big land with only like 42 million, I think, people.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah.
And 11 million have internet access, the rest don't.
Which is absolutely, I don't know, bizarre. That's like a city somewhere in America.
Khartoum alone is like 5 point something million, I think. Yeah. So it's like half of the population that has internet access, which is insane. It's such a small patch of land.
Yeah. But to go back to the thing, I mean, those people the majority who care about, which is I suppose the prerogative, but who care about things that in a way sort of justify so many things that they might not want to think about. And plus, engaging in those discourses, though, I think when it comes to critical thinking, it supersedes and it becomes super ordinate to, I think, anything, whether it's tradition, whether it's religion, whether it's thing. I mean, even religiously, I mean, without getting too theological, the first ayah that came down was, read, or iqra, which is, learn, and then the thing. So I think knowledge necessarily, or I would perhaps be, cheeky and say that philosophy essentially would supersede or become superordinate to religion, and those class of people should not be touched, should be given all disposals, but necessarily for mass consumption and for to sustain a sort of the status quo. And I think you need to have, a sort of a short circuit, which is something I remember reading for Ibn Rushd, who says that there's I think it was The Harmony Between Religion and Philosophy, the book is called. And he said that there's a class of people who can talk about certain things and those who can't talk about certain things. But I would sort of shift the argument to say that for those who want to engage in those sort of things, and absolutely everything should be, but for those who don't, necessarily should not be forced.
Should not be forced?
Should not be forced.
To what?
And I think to engage.
Yeah. They should not be forced to engage, but they should be empowered nonetheless.
I don't even think empowered. I might be a little bit controversial, but I don't think they should be even being empowered. I mean, encouraged. I think empowered, it would come from a sort of what's it called? Aspiration, natural aspiration to do that.
Well, maybe you should, you encouraging or not is another question, but empowering them is giving them the knowledge that they can. That's it.
Okay.
And how they can do that.
Okay, but I think by not tabooing them gives them the sort of potentiality to be.
No, that's not really empowering them, because empowering them means sort of like mentally vaccinating them, if that makes sense. You give them the tools and abilities to sort of dissect arguments and dissect whatever people tell them, differentiate lies from truth, how to navigate them, the political scene themselves and the discourse, and form their own opinions. You're not necessarily forcing an opinion on them. You are educating them on forming opinions. That's it. So they don't get sort of swept up by the next dictator.
I would argue, and this is my extreme side talking. I think the sort of mental vaccination or the sanitization.
No, don't make it sound like cleansing. It's not sanitization.
Okay. They just called me on one of my political maneuvers.
Okay.
So vaccination, let us use that word, which is necessarily unfair because it has a positive connotation to it. So mental vaccination, in a sense, can be a model to, from what I understand, a model to critique. Now, even models of critiquing, I mean, the science of the philosophy of science that in itself, the way in which you go about, finding out the quote unquote truth, depending on, whether you're a fan, such as myself, of postmodernism or not, such as yourself.
I was gonna say, because this sounds very postmodernist of you. You're basically saying that this methodology is not any less valid than the other, of like sort of thinking through things.
Yes.
Well, of course, it's not any or less valid, any more or less valid, but at the end, would you run a laptop without a firewall that at least tells you that this thing wants to connect and tells you what it does exactly?
See, that would be a wrong premise, because firewall necessarily stops bad things from coming in.
No, that's not the firewall job. That's the anti-malware's job. The firewall it just blocks everything and filters them and tells you when there's something that wants to connect. Most firewalls these days are kind of automatic, that they kind of do this automatically, but it does notify you that something wants to connect, and you judge by yourself what this thing, if it's like legit for you or not. Then you either allow or disallow. You have complete control over it. You judge by yourself at the end of the day. I think the word vaccination is because it's such an automatic process. You felt that it's like after you vaccinate somebody mentally, they have no choice in what they're doing. That's not true. You sort of give them the tools to pick apart each thought that comes their way. Then they can judge.
Okay, fair. I understand, but what I have a problem with is the tools in itself. I mean, the tools can be beneficial, yes, but even the tools in itself is a form of practice that could necessarily benefit in establishing a truth that's beneficial for the vaccinator, if that makes sense.
Well, if you go about it in a devious way, sure. But that's the thing about giving people the tools about critical thinking, because like a blacksmith, you can smith your own tools. So at the end, even if you like sort of sneak in a little virus with that tool, a little mental virus, it's bound to be found out, because you gave them security tools. They will pick apart the tools that you gave them.
But sorry to be a devil advocate, and this is going to care. But wouldn't that be necessarily the same thing, or could someone possibly, and here we're talking about possibilities and potentialities of having a backdoor, similarly to the one that we were discussing earlier?
How is it similar?
No, not similar. I say there's a potentiality for that to happen. Injecting them with a sort of a liquid. Supposedly vaccinates, and in those sort of chemicals there is a specific chemical that's integral to the compound.
See, the problem is that you're focusing on the analogy too much.
And that's what someone who's losing an argument
yeah, see, the problem with that is that the physical world is not a very good way to describe such abstract thoughts, because if it just gives you an idea of what the process is. It's not even in like scientific models. You have to test the limits of the model of what it can represent, because if you push it to the edges, it's gonna break apart. Okay, fine. Let's go back to the point of mental vaccination. It's sort of they can't be the same backdoor like the backdoor of religion, because the backdoor of religion is a complete system that only makes sense internally, which means that it makes sense if you assume it to be true. That's the only way that it works. You have to take it as a whole. Even then, you can like sort of warp it a little bit, because then after it installs that backdoor of whatever somebody with this religious rank says is true. But if you install critical thinking in somebody, it does not need any external rule. Mission does not need external rules. It does not support itself. You know what I mean? It's sort of it is a basis to build your thoughts not on but by. It's just like masonry tools. It's not the door, it is the tools to build whatever you want to do.
But here's where I go back to my point again, which is necessarily those tools in itself. I mean, at the end of the day, there are tools and they're, what's the word? Artificial, in a sense that they're man-made tools. Those tools in itself could produce biases.
Well, there's also something else, is that it's not centralized, I think. So it's it's totally peer-to-peer. So I say a thought, you inspect it. Okay, this sounds good. This has no logical errors or fallacies in it. I accept that thought, or maybe not. Depends on what kind of thought it is. But you don't have that sort of inspection in religion.
I think.
So it's self-maintaining. That's what I'm saying.
I think I would disagree there in two senses. In the sense that there is, I mean, in religion, I think when it comes to just cosmology in general, just identifying what came and what happened and God and blah 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 and all that stuff and the cosmos and the universe and all that stuff. What religion does necessarily is that there's an element of it that's a little bit phantom, as opposed to materialistic, in a sense that could be mystical or whimsical for those who would use those adjectives, but necessarily I would argue that, and this is something I'm not particularly well versed in theology or Islamic theology, but this is something that's very interesting that I've heard recently, which is religion has given you, well, at least here in the Islamic world, it has given the ability to critically think and analyze and even develop knowledge to a certain degree. Religion.
How?
We're talking about the gold. No, we're not talking about these times.
Oh.
We're talking about, for instance, the golden age of Islam. The interesting thing about that is, well, perhaps this is this thing, which is necessarily it's when we have sort of left or abandoned these customs of critique and used religion as political gain and social conformity, and sort of completely disengaged. I mean, today we have religious sort of theological Islamic worldviews that have been existing for thousands and thousands of years.
But okay, so
hundreds of years.
How does this mean that religion is not a short circuit? Or how does this mean that critical thinking could be a short circuit?
In the sense that the way religion is practiced, I think today is, I would argue absolutely categorically, is detrimental to advancement, technological, intellectual, or otherwise, necessarily. Specifically here in Sudan and places like Saudi Arabia and the Gulf regions. But previously, I think it, there's well documented sort of evidence suggesting that religion was a sort of gateway, if not, I mean, for instance, if the great philosophers of the golden age were perhaps some of the smartest people to have ever walked this earth, and most of them got their inspiration and the way they were educated themselves. They were taught by a shuyukh, and they were taught about by polymaths, but people who also versed in religion.
You noticed something, that the way that they formulate ideas, sort of that it comes from an already existing internal convention, what is the word that I'm trying to say? Conviction. Yeah, okay. That's the word. So it comes from an already existing internal conviction. Then they don't even try to prove it. They just say it. And if it makes sense to enough people, that becomes the truth, which is a little bit more wishy-washy than the current, critical thinking sort of model of proving things. Do you feel how that would amplify? Do you see how that could amplify like biases that are already existing in people? Because if you already say things that are already biases in people, it's gonna spread a lot. That's how we have this version of Islam.
I mean, yeah, I mean, in that sense, I would absolutely agree. I would absolutely concede to the point. I mean, here, I mean, like I said, religion practices in the 21st century necessarily in most places, or Islamically, let's say, practices in most places is to the absolute detriment of the societies in which those practices are, practiced. And I think if you have one last thing to say about religion, let's move on before. I mean, yeah. And I still haven't even given.
Before we get swatted.
before we get exactly. But yeah, and the third reason as to why I started the Philosophy Society.
Oh yeah, we're talking about that.
yeah. The third reason as to why we started the Philosophy Society is there was a sort of similar experiment that I ran back in university in England, and I was very similar. I started the Philosophy Society, I was president of it, and it was very, very, very fruitful in a sense that, and I believe that philosophy structures the questions that are being posed but does not answer them, which just can be frustrating. It is frustrating. And so in every single meeting we'd come out, whether it's talking about love or romance or like whatever it is, we'd come out with a more defined structure of the question and a more defined answer, subjective answer of what the other person has to say, which can necessarily mold or a little bit change our perception of reality or that particular subject.
I see. So did that translate well here in Sudan?
Well, I mean, it's very hard, I think, to immediately notice those things. I mean, you can't go up to someone like fill a questionnaire. What does love mean to you? And then afterwards, could you fill a question? What does love mean to you? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see. Well, I guess it's all about, like you said, it's about how you ask the question, the structure of it that will give you the answers. Well, I guess that's more or less true, but not in Sudan. I think in Sudan it's kind of different in the way that I've seen how people answer questions. They would sometimes hear something totally different from what you asked. They just, it's like kind of like, those chatbots that take keywords from like the sentence and then answer according to what they think it means.
Yeah.
It's sort of like that. They find like keywords like love, meme. That's it. The rest of the question does not really matter.
Okay.
So they answer according to what they think you are asking.
Okay. Huh.
And it's usually something that they have been asked before, or like they've practiced saying. It's this sort of thing that we have that we don't like saying, I don't know.
Yes.
We have to have an answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
To be fair, though, I think every Sudanese person knows sort of superficially more about everything. Like
they give. It's a weird kind of paradox.
Yeah.
They know more than they give, and I don't understand it. Why? Why do you do this?
But to be fair, when I came to Sudan, like I studied civil engineering and psychology, but I could now tell you, like just from the conversations that me and you have, like a little, like more significantly more than what I used to know previously about, for instance, computing or speakers, or because we had a couple of problems, and I could talk about what's inside a washing machine, because I had to get our washing machine fixed. And those are things those are sort of speed bumps that act as like learning curves on like random things in Sudan. So like a random person in Sudan would know a little bit about mechanics, a little bit about computing, a little bit about, a lot actually about politics, but not necessarily all of it is true.
Yeah, it's like a jack of all trades.
Yeah.
But answers to none.
That's true. That's true. But yeah, and that's the reason why I started the Philosophy Society. And I think moving forward, what I envision is a lot of these sort of societies propping up and a lot of people engaging in conversations that are outside of the comfort zone. And more importantly, and I think here this is a very unique idea and perhaps very, very controversial, which is what you say or what you think isn't what you are. And I think that is very important because here in Sudan, it always seems when you're talking about politics, and because like what I said earlier, the sort of contamination of political ideology and like it's very politicized here in Sudan. Necessarily, when we talk about things, you're very cautious as to what does this person want. I think, and I think sometimes there's conversations that you can whimsically and fantastically, or what's it called, talk about and spontaneously and talk about things that is not going to change the character or your character, but you're talking about it because necessarily it will develop your conceptions of things.
Yeah, that's the third reason, right?
That's like one of not even a fourth reason. That's like a synthesis between the first reason and some random thought that I had.
Yeah, see, that kind of like reminds me of exams. It's because you don't give yourself a chance for failure until you are at the exam.
Yeah.
Basically we treat life as an exam in Sudan. Mm-hmm. We don't experience the problems and we don't engage in them enough to formulate that experience. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not even. Sorry. Not even formulating the experience. It's just having thoughts that you don't have to actualize, or thoughts that you don't have to live by, or engaging in conversations that are outside your comfort zone. I mean, for instance, the homosexuality, for instance, or the existence of God, and so on. These are all conversations. People think the substance behind having those conversations necessarily is either indoctrination or trying to conform or creating a sort of identity or a group of people but it's not necessarily that. It's literally just envisioning or trying to conceptualize other people's perspective in order for you, if anything, to strengthen your point of view or recheck or redesign your point of view.
I see. Okay, I think I almost get what you mean. But there's one thing that I don't really understand. So what does experience, or not experience, like the fear of kind of talking about these thoughts really have to do with all of it?
I think that would be an individual sort of question to ask people. But the fear of these talks would be on other, like, for instance, here when we talk about, okay, I'll give you a good example, which is what you said earlier, which is when you said when you talk about philosophy, like another bit philosophy say, right?
Yeah.
And in a sense, why do they say that? You know what I mean? And it's that can be an individual reasons, but maybe they see it as pampering, maybe they see it as some sort of frivolous luxury, maybe they see it as such. But
okay, I get it. Because I've been told multiple times like not to talk in English, even though I'm doing it now.
Yeah.
But it's like they see it as some sort of like I'm trying to be superior. It's not that the person tells me not to talk in English, but somebody else tells me, like, generally speaking, when you speak to people, don't even use English words, even if they're like very simple words. Don't use them. I think that plays into it. It's like even when somebody talks in English, بيقولوا ده بتفلسف.
Yeah. I think what the message would be: allow your mind to venture into sort of wondrous, sort of mystical and absolutely absurd realities, and maybe you'd come out the other end slightly more informed about other people's reality, I suppose.
Yeah, basically dive in.
Yeah.
And we still haven't figured out the name of the podcast. And this is the end of the episode. Amazing. You know what? Why don't you tell us? And by the way, the Philosophy Society is every Saturday, or maybe every other Saturday. It depends. Just check our Twitter page where this will be posted. probably. Anyway, tell us your thoughts. Tell us what you think we can change about the way we run things. Also, if you have name suggestions, give them to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're constantly looking for more and more controversial issues, and perhaps we've sort of exhausted a few just now talking
Yeah.
about religion and politics.
Nothing is off limits, by the way, in this podcast.
Oh yes, absolutely. I cannot stress this enough. As a matter of fact, we actually sort of sustain ourselves through controversy. I think it would be an accurate representation of our sort of mental capacity to consume things. And yeah, like Abdurrahman said, suggestions are welcome to different topics, and even comment in this podcast, comment on the sessions that we've had, and try as hard, try if you're interested to make it to those sessions. I promise you, well, I'm not gonna promise you because
No promise.
no promises, but there will be tea, even though last time there'll be tea and biscuits, and every single Sudanese person, I think, love.
Maybe popcorn. It depends on how lucky you are.
Yeah, if we're having a movie night, yeah, there's definitely gonna be popcorn. So if that's not enticing or an incentive enough to come, then I don't know what is.
If nothing else, just come and eat or drink.
Yes. This has been the Philosophy Society, and I hope you guys enjoyed our pilot podcast. Share.
Abdurrahman Zain.
Mohammed Khojali. And
We'll see you next episode, if there's one.
yes, subscribe, share, and tell your friends about it. All that good shit. Yo, you know what I just noticed about the podcast session yesterday is that we've literally given voices to so many demographics that even if you do disagree with some of the ideas that the things that you disagree with have found a voice of disagreement, if that makes sense. Specifically when it comes to the religion aspect of it. I mean, you have people who are for and people who are against. And I think yesterday we've covered the for and against. Well, not covered, but necessarily given valid voices to both, which could potentially be inclusive of all sort of demographics. I think unwittingly as well, which is and organically, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, how's your day? How'd you sleep? And all that, niceties. And what are your plans for today? How's the plans for today going?